Being Max Verstappen's teammate is tough, which has only been emphasised by the start of the 2025 F1 season. Max is currently sitting on 69 points.
Nice.
Across these first 4 races, and his teammates only 2. So I thought we'd have a look at all of the drivers who have been Max Verstappen's teammate across his 10 and a bit seasons in Formula 1 so far, and rank those who have been just unfortunate enough to be opposite him in the garage. We're first going to rank them based on how they performed against Max himself, and then we're going to rank them based on the entirety of their careers and see what conclusions we can come to. We're going to be using a tier list today, and because Red Bull gives you wings, each of the tiers are going to be based on birds, with larger being better. Our tiers are albatross, eagle, turkey, chicken, and tit. That's better. We're going to be going in chronological order of Max's career, which means we're starting with Carlos Sainz, who was teammates with Max Verstappen at Toro Rosso across the 2015 season and the first 4 races of 2016 before Max was promoted to the Red Bull team. Both of the drivers being rookies coming into the 2015 season, and both of the rookies having ex-racing driver dads, meant that the media depicted this rivalry as being vicious. However, Carlos has since come out and said that he and Max actually got on alright, and it was very much blown out of proportion by the media. But how did Carlos actually fare against Max in their time together? Well, particularly during that 2015 season, Max and Carlos, whilst battling each other very intensely, they were also very intensely battling the car's reliability. The Toro Rosso car of 2015 just having absolutely no reliability. The Renault engine in the back of that thing could not seem to go for a full race, and they had 11 DNFs across 19 races as a team. But in terms of raw hard statistics, you can see on the screen right now how Carlos and Max fared up against each other, and it's quite clear to see that Max did have the edge over Carlos in that season and a bit together. Qualifying head-to-head, race head-to-head, and points total all favouring Max Verstappen. However, one thing you do have to take into account is the fact that Carlos Sainz had more DNFs in their time as teammates, which probably skews the points total itself a little bit further towards Max. One thing to keep in mind though, as you're looking at these statistics, is the fact that Carlos Sainz had already had 5 years of Formula style car experience before stepping into this Formula 1 seat with Toro Rosso, whereas Max Verstappen had only had 1 year of experience and was obviously somewhat his junior in terms of age as well. So in terms of a ranking for Carlos, for me, he's going to go into the Eagle category, because despite the fact that he was beaten by Max, he wasn't a million miles away, especially when you consider some of the drivers that we've got coming up for the rest of this video. Carlos did an alright job. In terms of Carlos's whole career, things really did seem to kick off after he left Renault to join McLaren. In his 2 seasons there, he beat a rookie Lando Norris across the first 2 seasons of him being in Formula 1. However, we know the driver that Lando Norris has now become, which only makes it more impressive looking back. And then he moved to Ferrari, where he obviously got the 4 wins that he has in his career, whilst playing a very good number 2 role to Charles Leclerc, of course another incredibly elite tier driver on the grid. Carlos hasn't exactly been handed the easiest teammates in his time in Formula 1. And whilst Carlos Sainz has never really been the out and out fastest driver on the grid, his ability to read a race and command strategy from the cockpit has always been something that's admired by fans. And the way that he's able to join teams when they seem to be doing worse and be part of the development of the cars to make them better by the time he leaves shows that he has a good knack for feedback within the team. And despite Carlos's rocky start to his Williams career in 2025, I do think when you consider his career as a whole, he is one of the more elite tier drivers that Max Verstappen has come up against as a teammate, and thus I am putting him in the Albatross category. After Max got the promotion to the Red Bull team after 4 races in 2016, replacing the outgoing Danny Kvyat, Daniel Ricciardo became his teammate from that point on until the end of the 2018 season, when Daniel would leave the team to go to Renault. And what a battle it was between these 2 drivers. Though the further that time went on with Max and Daniel at Red Bull, the more the changing of the guard seemed to be happening. The team were more rallying around Max rather than Daniel, and ultimately that's kind of what forced him out of the team at the end of 2018. If you look at the overall stats of Daniel and Max as teammates, things are generally pretty even, especially on the points front, when you consider the amount of DNFs that Daniel Ricciardo was getting, especially towards that 2018 season after he had announced that he was leaving the team. The luck at that point was just non-existent for him. But once again, like with Carlos Sainz, it is Max Verstappen that comes out on top in terms of the statistics. And what you have to remember is the fact that the Max Verstappen that Daniel Ricciardo was up against here is not the 4-time champion Max Verstappen that we see today. Yes, he did have that raw speed, but he didn't have that decision making, the consistency, the ability to remain composed in tough situations that we see of Max today. And so in a way, Daniel was lucky to come up against Max at this stage of his career rather than later on. One thing is for certain though, and that's that across their time together as teammates, Red Bull had the 3rd fastest car behind Ferrari and Mercedes. Though at certain tracks that favoured the strong chassis and aero of that Red Bull car, they were able to fight for wins. And whenever that car could fight for wins, it was both Max and Daniel that were able to take advantage, with both of them picking up wins during their time as teammates despite not having the fastest car. And that's kind of the issue that you've seen with Red Bull ever since Daniel has left. And particularly in the more recent couple of seasons, when the Red Bull car isn't the out-and-out fastest car throughout the seasons, but it has the ability to win a race, it's only Max that's able to go out and do it, whereas the teammates tend to languish in the pack. But with all things considered, I do think that Daniel Ricciardo is the best teammate that Max Verstappen has had at Red Bull, and for that he is going in the Albatross tier. Daniel's whole career is definitely one that you can look at in 2 phases. You've got pre-joining McLaren and post-joining McLaren. Before he joined McLaren, Daniel Ricciardo came through the ranks as a Red Bull Junior driver, stepping into that main Red Bull car for the 2014 season, alongside a Sebastian Vettel that had just won the last 4 championships back to back to back to back, and outscored him in their first season together. He then went toe-to-toe with Max Verstappen, who, as we know, is a generational talent and has gone on to win 4 championships, again back to back, before moving to Renault, and whilst maybe not having the best time of things over there, and it not really working out the way that he might have wanted it to, he still managed a podium and was still that Daniel Ricciardo that we know and love. However, after that move to McLaren, despite getting that win at Monza in 2021, nothing ever really seemed to click for him, and he was unable to sort of recapture that spark that we saw from him before that point. There was a bit of light at the end of the tunnel when he returned to the grid for AlphaTauri, looking to put his name in the hat for that second Red Bull seat back alongside Max Verstappen, but it just really didn't seem to work out for him. He was unable to show that he truly deserved to get that seat back, and in the end was replaced by Liam Lawson for the final 6 races of last season, and that's probably the end of what we'll see of Daniel in Formula 1. I think though that the positives of Daniel Ricciardo's career definitely outweigh the negatives. Yes, he did struggle towards the end, but Daniel's career on a whole was very solid, and he was an absolute joy to watch in Formula 1, both on and off the track, with his massive dive bombs and that massive grin. So for me, I am going to put Daniel in that Albatross tier, and I'm going to put him slightly above Carlos Sainz. Let me know in the comments how you'd rank the 2 of them. After Daniel left Red Bull for Renault, it was Pierre Gasly that took over that seat. Unfortunately, he only made it 12 races into the 2019 season. It seems that he was promoted a little early for his Formula 1 career. His highlights across his time with Red Bull include a drive in Azerbaijan where he came from the back of the pack all the way up into P6, however unfortunately retired from that race. And in Silverstone that year, he had somewhat front-running pace throughout the weekend and actually managed to finish in front of Max, though that was more down to the fact that Max had just been taken out by Sebastian Vettel more than Pierre's performance. This would, though, be the only time that Pierre managed to outscore Max in their time as teammates. As you can see by the stats here, it was a bit of a whitewash and really was the start of that second driver issue at Red Bull. His lowlights were, unfortunately, just about every other weekend. In particular, his crashes in testing and the Austrian Grand Prix, obviously Red Bull's home race, he was lapped by Max. Unfortunately, the only place that Pierre's Red Bull performance can go is in the tit category. Whilst Pierre definitely was promoted a bit too soon in his Formula One career to the Red Bull seat, his demotion and the hardships he endured in that 2019 season, in particular him losing one of his best mates, Antoine Hubert, in that fatal accident at the Spa Grand Prix that year in Formula 2, really seemed to invigorate Pierre to come back stronger. And what did follow was that amazing P2 finish in Brazil, and of course his incredibly emotional Monza victory in 2020. Pierre's 2021 season was also absolutely sublime, him mixing it up with the front runners regularly despite being in an AlphaTauri. 2022 was a bit more difficult for him, with the AlphaTauri's pace definitely regressing into the new regulation period, before moving to Alpine in 2023, being somewhat of a rebuilding year for him. And 2024, particularly towards the end, we started to see a bit more of that Pierre that we know and love. And in the 2025 Bahrain Grand Prix that we've just seen, we saw Pierre back to his best with the P5 qualifying and P7 finish in the race, almost holding off Max Verstappen to get P6. I think I'm going to rate Pierre's career as a whole in the Turkey category, but I wholeheartedly believe that there is yet more to come from him in his career. Alex Albon took over from Pierre Gasly at Red Bull halfway through the 2019 season and was given all the way until the end of the 2020 season, when he was then replaced by Sergio Perez. Alex's time at Red Bull was incredibly difficult. When you look at the stats of him versus Max, whilst it might look better than Pierre's effort, what you have to remember is the fact that the 2020 Red Bull car was definitely superior to the 2019 car, and there was less competition at the front because Ferrari had kind of fallen off a cliff in 2020. That being said, Alex did start off his career with Red Bull incredibly strongly, fighting from P20 all the way up into P5 at the race in Belgium, and was very unfortunate not to get a podium in his opening season with the team at the Brazilian Grand Prix, where he was taken out by Lewis Hamilton. Another thing to take into consideration is of course that he was promoted to that Red Bull seat only halfway through his rookie season in Formula One. Though overall, his pace in qualifying and races was just absolutely nowhere near where Red Bull needed it to be and where Max was putting that car, and so Red Bull kind of knew they had an issue. Again, referencing the stats, when you consider how many DNFs Max Verstappen had versus Alex in their time together, and the points gap to still be as big as it is, it wasn't a good look for Alex. I do still think though, despite that Alex did have a better performance in the Red Bull than Pierre did. Could be because he was given longer to prove himself, we'll never really know. But for that, I'm going to put Alex in the chicken category. Of course, after Alex was dropped by Red Bull for the 2021 F1 season, he did a season in DTM, where interestingly he was outscored that season by none other than Liam Lawson. Though I do not claim to be any sort of DTM expert, I don't know if there was any sort of other circumstances that were going on that might have caused Alex to perform slightly worse. However, he would then go on to take the seat at Williams for the 2022 season and set about rebuilding his career. And I'd say since then he's done a pretty great job, especially in the 2023 season, where he seemingly was getting a lot more points relative to where that car actually was. The issue that Alex has sort of had since his return to Formula One is it's been hard to give him too much credit based on the weakness of the teammates that he's had. Logan Sargent and Nicholas Latifi haven't exactly been giving him a run for his money. Before, towards the end of last season, of course, Franco Colapinto came in and did a fairly good job versus Alex. That being said, the big teammate coming in for this season, Carlos Sainz, has so far been put to the sword by Alex. 4 races in, 19 points to Alex Albon, 1 point to Carlos Sainz. Of course, Carlos is adjusting to a new team, but it's an incredibly strong start for Alex this season, and I don't think many people were expecting him to do so strongly against Carlos. I think overall though, Alex's career so far can only really go in the chicken category. Doesn't quite hold a candle to the rest of the drivers that we have covered so far in this video. However, again, like Pierre, there should be a long career ahead of Alex at this stage, so who knows the driver that he could become in his remaining time in Formula One. Sergio Perez was the obvious choice for Red Bull going into that 2021 season, with Alex's performances not meeting the mark and Sergio Perez being a free agent going into that season after Aston Martin or Racing Point had appointed Sebastian Vettel to take his seat, it made complete sense that Red Bull would snap up that opportunity and take on a Sergio Perez that at the time was the leader of the midfield. But I think it's fair to say that in the first season that Sergio was alongside Max in that Red Bull car, it wasn't an amazing season. Despite the fact that he was instrumental in Max's Abu Dhabi success, the season as a whole left a lot to be desired. Valtteri Bottas in the Mercedes that season had a far better season than Sergio did, and whilst Max and Lewis were very even on points in that season, Mercedes obviously came out as Constructors' champions because Sergio's performance didn't quite meet the mark. This was the first of 2 Constructors' championships that Red Bull missed out on whilst Max was winning the Drivers' Championship when Perez was in the car. Of course, the second of these being the most recent season in 2024, which was certainly Sergio Perez's weakest season as Verstappen's teammate. Him getting only 7 points across the last third of the season, his qualifying definitely being the thing letting him down, starting all the way back in the pack and then just not quite being able to fight his way through. Sergio's better seasons at Red Bull were definitely the 2022 and 2023 seasons, particularly at the start of the season, where he tended to actually go up against Max and there would be somewhat of a title fight going on until Max took a strong hold on things and ran away with the title. Sergio obviously being incredibly strong at temporary tracks, which kind of gained him that reputation. If we have a look at the head-to-head stats, you can see that it's a dominant win from Max across all of the categories, though Sergio did get the better of Max on certain occasions, like at some of the street tracks, as I mentioned. So there was occasions where he was outperforming him, but they were just not quite coming often enough. The other thing to note about Checo Perez's time at Red Bull, especially compared to the last 2 teammates that we've spoken about in this video and the previous 2 that Max Verstappen had, is that they were at the start of their careers, rookies coming in with not much experience. Whereas with Sergio, it's the complete opposite. When he joined Red Bull, he was in the prime of his career, had a wealth of experience in Formula 1, and was still not able to make it work. Despite all of that, I do think that Sergio definitely did do a better job in that car than both Albon and Pierre Gasly, and so he is going in the Turkey category for me. In terms of Sergio's whole career, he was an absolute titan of the midfield up until the point at which he joined Red Bull, especially in his time at Force India and then it became Racing Point. He was so strong at that team, kind of made that team his own. And especially when you look at that 2020 Sakir Grand Prix performance, him coming from last to first, it just kind of sums up the fact that Sergio Perez was solid. Unfortunately, his time at Red Bull didn't quite go to plan, but one thing he did manage was multiple victories, something that only Carlos Sainz and Daniel Ricciardo have managed on this list so far. So I'm going to go for the Eagle category for Sergio's whole career. Let me know how you feel about it down below. Up next, we've got Liam Lawson. Let's keep this one brief because he did only, unfortunately, get 2 races against Max. And in those 2 races, Max Verstappen managed a 2nd place in Australia, a 3rd place in the China sprint race, and a 4th place in the China main race, whilst Liam Lawson was all the way down at the back and struggling to really get past anyone. Though saying that, Liam Lawson's time at Red Bull was cut incredibly short. 2 races is never going to be enough time to make a proper judgment on how good someone is at a team. However, unfortunately for this video, I do have to make a judgment based on what we saw with Liam at Red Bull, and so unfortunately it has to be the tits category. And I'd say there is probably quite a gulf between him and Pierre, but he's got to go in there, there's nowhere else for it to be. And again, when it comes to Liam's whole career, given that he is only 15 races in, it is somewhat unfair to pass judgment on a whole career when it has only been so short. Unfortunately, so far, he hasn't exactly set the world alight, so he is going to have to go into that tit category. But hopefully, Liam's career from this point forward only gets better, and he has a long and illustrious Formula 1 career that we can all look back on and say how good of a driver he is. And of course, most recently, the current teammate of Max Verstappen is Yuki Tsunoda, whose start to life at Red Bull was not exactly ideal. At his home race in Japan, Max Verstappen won the race, whereas Yuki was unable to score points. However, he does seem to have adjusted to that car fairly quickly, and in Bahrain, where the Red Bull car looked miserable to drive, both he and Max managed to get into the points, and he wasn't a million miles off him throughout the weekend. We can't really yet judge Yuki's time at Red Bull. I'm hoping that he's going to manage to make it to the end of the season, and maybe at that point, or maybe whenever he leaves the Red Bull team, we can pass better judgment. I can make a prediction though as to where I think he's going to land, and I think he'll probably end up being around as good as Alex Albon was against Max, maybe slightly better, but it's difficult to say right now with all that we've seen so far. Yuki's career as a whole in Formula 1 has been pretty solid. It didn't start off that way though. His first season, he was unfortunate to be up against a Pierre Gasly who, as I mentioned earlier, was absolutely in his prime in 2021. So Yuki's first season maybe left a little to be desired, though I'd say since that point, he has only really got better season by season, showing both Nick de Vries and Daniel Ricciardo the exit door in their F1 careers. Yuki definitely proved that he was the deserving driver of that Red Bull seat for the 2025 season, which seemed to be the conclusion that just about everyone had come to apart from Red Bull. His first two races of this season for VCarb were also incredibly strong before he got the promotion, though I do think that Yuki's career overall probably is just around about where Alex Albon's career has been so far, so it's going to slot in alongside him in the chicken category, but slightly better. So there you have it. All of Max Verstappen's 7 teammates that he's had so far in Formula 1 ranked up against each other. Let me know in the comments how you feel about them, or if there's anything that you feel that I've missed talking about in this video. And thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.